Shalawam. I want to say call Allah Yahweh Hashem Yahweh Shah. That's all praises to the Most High God in the name of His only begotten Son. I want to do this video today. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I have noticed that, and I mean this is something that's always been an issue in Israel for the most part, but I don't know, I've kind of noticed it being pushed a little bit more to the forefront recently about basically whether or not, Israelites are only going to look like Negroes or if they're going to look like the other nations also. I mean, it's always been an endless debate about this, but I mean, I personally think that you would have to be a fool to not understand that all Israelites are not going to look like so-called black people today. I mean, it's not a hard concept to grasp when you look at how nations are mixed and whatnot, but, some people just still can't get it. So, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a prime example of how that's completely destroyed. We're going to look at one person that actually, I would even say, helped me understand the concept of them not looking like Negroes at this point, necessarily. And that person's Teena Marie. And I do got to say I'm a big fan of hers. I have been for a very long time. As you know, she passed away about 5 years ago now, but she's a prime example of Jake looking like the other nations, okay? But it's clear she's an Israelite when you look at her life, the music she makes, the statements she makes. It becomes clear, okay? It's crystal clear to anybody that's spiritual in the least. All right, so we're gonna get into that. First, I want to start off with a verse. It's Amos 9:9. For lo, I will command, I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Because the house of Israel, we have to understand, has been displaced into all these different nations. We mix with nations, our offspring is going to somewhat look like these other nations. It's inevitable at this point, especially now, thousands of years after we've been displaced from our homeland. But, let's move on. I think everybody knows we've been, displaced and moved from the nation of Israel. Tobit 13:3. Confess him before the Gentiles, ye children of Israel, for he hath scattered us among them. So, the disciples, they had to go out and speak before the actual Gentiles because Israel was scattered among them. So, yeah, Israel somewhat looked like these heathens that were round about to some degree. Okay, to some degree. That's not saying that, just because you see, someone else that looks like a different nation, that they just have to be an Israelite. It just means that they could be an Israelite. It doesn't necessarily mean they're gonna look like excuse me. Doesn't mean they're gonna necessarily look like Shaft, as a lot of people like to say. Okay. All right. First off, let me give you some basic history, and I'm going off basically just what I know is fan knowledge, and I'm gonna use some I'm going to use some articles and quotes and whatnot to talk about this too. But for anyone that's not familiar with Teena Marie, and I'm sure most of you are, even if you're not, that big a fan or whatnot, she basically signed to Motown back in the 70s. She's from California. She was considered she's actually considered probably the most popular ever so-called white R&B artist ever, I would say. She had different hits and whatnot when she was on Motown, and even after she ended up leaving Motown, her career spanned like probably a little over 30 years. Okay, and even back then when she was first signed, everybody was amazed that someone who looks like her could sing R&B soul so convincingly. You know, so there was never any difference between her and anyone like Diana Ross or any of the other so-called black R&B divas. She was hanging right along in there with them, and everybody was confused as far as how this was the case. She herself identified herself as Portuguese. Now, just for edification, I think we're gonna look at a map and see where Portugal is on the map. All right, Portugal, right here. Now notice how close Portugal is to the west coast of Africa and Central Africa. Notice how close Portugal is to all this. All right, and Spain. Now again, she considered herself Portuguese. So there's a quote, or actually a little passage in this book that you might have read, Nature Knows No Color Rhymes by J.A. Rogers. On page 123, alright, I'm going to read these two quick paragraphs. Well, this one quick paragraph. Excuse me. It says, Waits says, an interesting gradation of all shades down to the black is exhibited by the Jews. Especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. Okay? Did you hear that? Especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. Alright? Right here. The Portuguese Jews were very dark, says Pritchard. The Duchess de Brantes, wife of Napoleon's ambassador to Portugal, said that the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese could be seen in a single person. So dark were the Jews, especially of Portugal and southern Spain, that many whites thought that all Jews were black or dark. Alright, and that for the most part, that's true. But just from this, you can see that Jews were all over Europe, in Spain, Portugal, in that area. Okay? So what does that tell us? That tells us that the Jews who were in these areas clearly were getting with the women of the nations around about in that area, and they were having kids, man. I mean, we already know how Jake get down when he goes to a new place, a new country, a new continent. We already know how Jake get down. So clearly that was the case in Spain and Portugal too. Okay, so what does that tell us? Along the lines, many centuries later, okay, there's going to be Jake in these areas in Portugal and Spain, or who identify themselves as Spanish and Portuguese. All right, but they're really going to be Jake, even though they may not look like how the Jew that was originally in that area looked. All right, so they might not be so-called black people. And Teena Marie, actually, one of her biggest hits was a song called Portuguese Love, which Most High Willing, I'm going to add to the end of this video. I actually saw her perform this live. I was at the show, and, I'm going to show the video and whatnot, but, once you see her sing, you're going to know she's a Jake. You know what I'm saying? People know Teena Marie, but I also know she was kind of unsung and whatnot, but once you hear her sing, you already know she's a Jake. Once you hear the way she talks, who she interacts with. In fact, the crowd was over 90% black. I would say 95%. And this is for a woman people who, for whatever reason, well, I'm not going to say for whatever reason, people that think she's white, right? And she's like 50, she was like 54. So you're telling me over 90% of black people are at this particular show came out to see a 54-year-old white woman perform, and you know what I'm saying? There's not something there as a reason why. It's because she's a Jake, man. She's an Israelite. She's one of us. All right? That no matter how you cut it, no matter how you slice it. But let me go a little bit more into why I say she's a Jake. because once you see this, I mean, it's kind of undeniable. All right. Before she passed, this was like the year before she passed in 2010. So the year before she passed was 2009. She came out with an album. It's called Congo Square. Now, I had not been familiar with what Congo Square was before, actually, until I heard the album. Uh, so, I started doing a little bit of research and whatnot. And, Congo Square, well, let me just read this. And then we'll go a little bit more into it. All right. This is from the website gonola.com. It says, before the days when we could all run for air conditioning, escape into the mall, or confine ourselves at home, people would gather together to socialize and try to beat the heat in the summer. In Spanish-controlled New Orleans of the late 18th century, this even applied to the slaves. Respecting Sunday as a day of rest, the Spanish gave their slaves the afternoon off and allowed them to socialize. Like the rest of us, slaves in New Orleans gathered and complained about the heat. They also entertained themselves, making music and dancing. The city leaders allowed the slaves to congregate, but outside the city, in an open area just outside the original city north of Rampart Street. This area became known as the Place des Nègres, more commonly as Place Congo. By the time the Americans took control, the city had grown past the Rue Carré, and this gathering point was called Congo Square, which is what she named her album. Congo Square was the place where black slaves could once again be Africans. And we all know we're not Africans, but, of course they're going to call us Africans. Even if for just one afternoon a week, they would bring drums, bells, and other musical instruments to the square and gather roughly by tribe to play music, sing, and dance. Now, Congo Square was, as they just described, was a place where the slaves would get together on Sundays, have fun, relax from the terrible, terrible week that they had, slaving for this devil. But, they looked forward to it. They looked forward to Sunday. They looked forward to church and whatnot. And then they also looked forward to dancing and having a good time, to relieve the stresses from, just their everyday daily lives, right? Now, Teena Marie has an interesting reason on why she even named her album Congo Square. So let's look at this here. So here's a quote from her. She says, I called it Congo Square because I've always had a deep affinity for New Orleans since the moment I got off the plane years and years ago. I felt like I had been there before. I thought about Congo Square, and that being the place where in slavery times on Sundays the slaves were allowed to go dance and sing. I thought what an amazing inspirational sound that must have been. People that were oppressed in the worst of ways, and how on Sundays they could lift themselves out of their pain and feel joy even for a day, even for a few hours. What an amazing, beautiful sound that must have been. Okay, now did y'all catch that? I felt like I had been there before. Now, one thing about Teena Marie, she always kind of was a real spiritual person, and she, as far as I can understand, she believed in reincarnation and whatnot, which is totally correct according to the scriptures, believed in the Most High and whatnot. So it's not surprising that, she felt like, she had been there before and whatnot. Now, the song on her actual LP, places herself in the place of one of those slaves and is, describing what's going on in Congo Square on that Sunday, with everybody dancing and singing and whatnot, So, clearly, an Edomite is not going to make songs from a slave's perspective about how they got to rejoice at the end of the week after slaving in the fields and whatnot. An Edomite is not going to do that. An Edomite is not going to make majority of so-called black music and make that their life. Okay, it's not going to happen. All right, it's not going to happen. And in fact, an Edomite is never going to be embraced by the so-called black community the way Teena Marie is. Okay, I mean it's impossible, completely impossible. And for anyone that thinks I'm just exaggerating the fact, I would just say, do a little bit of research on Teena Marie. Everything, people don't even really consider her a so-called white woman. They just look at her like she's a so-called black woman. You know what I'm saying, with white skin, which in reality that's exactly what it is. Okay, that's exactly what it is. But now let me move on a little bit. And even with the Congo Square thing, one thing that actually made her actually make this album, I'm just kind of I've read all this stuff before in various sources. I'm kind of just piecing together, what I could find on the net. Um, she actually discovered that her father's ancestors. Now remember, we always say we are who your father is, right? She discovered that her father's ancestors, and I've seen her dad before. He looks like a, so-called white man, so-called Edomite, right? She discovered that her father's ancestors came from New Orleans just before she wrapped up doing Congo Square. And she found out she was a mix of almost every American ethnicity except African, which, you're right, okay? You're right. But she identified as being Portuguese. Now, she basically had also found out that she might have had some Creole in her background and, whatnot. And, Creole, as we all know, Creole people, even though I see varying ideas and thoughts on what Creole people actually represents, but for the most part, it's so-called, Negroes, Native Indians, and so-called, white people, a big mixture that would make up Creole people for the most part. And a lot of them lived in the Louisiana area, New Orleans, all down in that area. A lot of Haitians, like as far as I know, make up Creole people also, right? And I remember some interview she was doing where she actually said that on her Ivory album that came out in 1990, that someone said she even looked Creole. Okay, when you look at these pictures, she don't look just like just no regular ass, you know, Edomite. Like she just don't. You know what I'm saying? You can tell even if you just look at her features. Beautiful woman, especially when she was younger. Um, you can tell by her features that there's something different. There's something else going on in there, right? So, there you go. She found out basically her ancestors from New Orleans and whatnot. So basically, she kind of found out she wasn't necessarily what she might thought she might have been. She was starting to find out other things. Now we know, going through history and whatnot, we know, slaves embarked at different ports in the U.S. and whatnot. And, it is what it is, and that's we ended up, making up the nation of Israel here in the U.S. But the fact that she found out that her father's ancestors came from New Orleans, and there's a lot of Creole people in New Orleans that's mixed with Native Indian, who are Israelites, so-called black people, who were Israelites, that got docked over here, it starts to kind of become apparent. All right. And not only with just her background, you'll also find out with certain things that happened to her throughout her career that pretty much it would only happen to a Jake. For instance, I don't know if people are familiar, I'm pretty sure people are, that so-called black artists back in the day, they would do records, all right? They would do albums, and their face and their likenesses were not put on the covers. Either so-called random white people were put on the cover, okay, or they would put some type of just a regular picture of like a lake or a pond or a beach or something like that on the cover, so white people would buy the albums, right? But they wouldn't be buying an album with Negro on the cover because white people didn't want to hear any Negroes, right? Even they did want to hear Negroes. They just couldn't have an image like that in their house. You know what I mean? But so record companies would put a false image or just a regular image on the cover instead of the actual artist so they could still sell albums. You might have seen this in the movie The Five Heartbeats, because that's what happened to Robert Townsend, Leon, and whoever else made up the Five Heartbeats. And that's what they did. Now, when Teena Marie first signed to Motown, this same exact thing happened to her, but in reverse, right? Because we all know Motown is known for numerous, black artists coming out of there: Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross, the Supremes, you name it. Classic, right? But this same thing happened to Teena Marie when she signed to Motown. Actually, let me show you the cover here. It was her first album. It was called Wild and Peaceful, and it was produced, at least executive produced by Rick James. Right? What did they put on the cover? You see this? And this was because they wanted people, they wanted black people to buy the album, and they didn't want her to focus on the fact that she was white. Because, when you listen to her, you can't really tell. I mean, I can kind of tell now that, I listened to her for years, but, it's hard to tell because she does soul that, that well, and that, she's that so-called black sounding that you wouldn't be able to tell. So when you look at it, this is what they put on her first album. Now, on her second album, people were very surprised because they actually put her face up there. And, you knew she was a so-called white woman. But on her first album, that was the image they put. Now, you telling me that, that would happen to any just Edomite that's singing and whatnot? Nah, it wouldn't. It happened because of the fact that she's an Israelite. And, hell, she's gonna go through hell, the same way we are. That's kind of part of the curses right there. All right, so I mean, once you start looking at the history behind that, you start to see the truth. And if I wasn't such a fan of her, probably beforehand, it might be a little bit harder for me to accept that. Oh, hey, so-called white people can be Israelites, even though. And let's be clear. Please, let's be really clear. I am definitely not one of these cats that try to make every so-called white person an Israelite because they can do a little jig or whatever the case may be, or the way they talk or whatnot. But we have to acknowledge the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is that all Israelites are not going to be so-called black people. Not at this point in time. Yes, it did start out that way. Yes, of course. The whole world of so-called black people in the beginning. But at this point now, it's not like that. Okay, so we need to, to understand that. And clearly, she was blessed with the talent of music. Writes a lot of her, writes pretty much all her own music, produces it. She's talented. We all know the Israelites, extreme talented, the salt of the earth. It doesn't, it's not hard to put two and two together with this one. Now, I will say Teena Marie is a completely extreme case, I think. I think it's an extreme case because all Israelites that are so-called white people or looking like these other nations, it might not be as prominent. It might, but there's going to be something about them that you're going to be like, oh, whoa, this person is different than, whatever they might consider themselves as, Japanese, Chinese, East Indian. There's something's going to be different about them. They're going to have a different style about them. They're going to have a different, it's going to be different. All right. So you just got to go off the spirit, and you can't look at it as, oh, this person don't look like this, because that's not the case. It's just not the case. I'm gonna go ahead and end this off here. I ain't want to make this too long, but I would say that if y'all haven't really heard of her music, and besides like the normal stuff, do a search and listen to some of her music, and I think or some of her interviews. You can look up the Unsung or being Teena Marie and whatnot. And I think you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. And again, most high willing, I'm gonna add the video of the concert I was at the end of this. But let me just show you a couple of quotes of what people say about her themselves. All right. Bob Davis, who I suppose is a reporter of SoulPatrol.com, I walked around during the course of the evening at a Teena Marie performance and asked at least 10 people the question, how come black people love Teena Marie so much even though she's white? Every person that I asked responded with the exact same answer. Teena Marie ain't white. She's one of us. Because you know what? She is one of us. And it's undeniable. You know what I mean? So, you know, we have to get out of this box that we live in as far as what we think about how Israel's going to look. The Most High, the Most High is not going to make it something to just be just this. You know, he's gonna make us be different. You know? Oh, and also there's this one. Fans were not the only ones surprised by her ethnicity. Early in her career, Motown opted to not send out press photographs so as to not prejudice fans and radio stations with the fact that Marie was white, which I mentioned earlier. But one of her childhood friends, singer Mickey Boyce Ellis, reportedly said she didn't realize her best friend was white until one day Marie's mother came to school to pick her up. Now, how is that possible? I mean, y'all seen pictures of Teena Marie, right? Y'all seen video. So how can a person who is a so-called black woman not know that this person is a so-called white woman and she's with her every day? They, pretty much they were best friends back then, right? Because she did everything like a Jake. She acted like a Jake, walked like a Jake, talked like a Jake, right? But she didn't know. She didn't know till the mom came to school. So you see, this is a spiritual thing, all right? And truth be told, even though a lot of people don't want to admit it, some of these people we call wiggers and whatnot, some of them people are Israelites too, even though we don't want to admit it. Maybe not the real corny ass ones, but you know what I'm saying. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end this off. So I hope this lesson was edifying, and Shalawam.
Come on now.
You know you got to be a hurricane.
early morning whispers to me I was taken unaware. I remember sunlight creeping in the window over there. The day had promised true love. Smiles awaken as we rise. Our golden slumbers long gone. Only you got in my eyes. And now I'll never be the same, 'cause you made me over. If I were a bell, baby, I would ring. Tell the whole world that you are my everything. If I were a bell, baby, you would know that you are my only love. And it's wonderful. If I were a bell, baby, I would ring each day for you. Early morning, it talks to me. I was taken by surprise. I remember fingers floating. Play, baby. As you help me hypnotize. The day had promised true love. Smiles awaken as we share our golden slumbers long gone. Only you and I were there. And now, honey, I'm not the same, 'cause you made me over. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. If I were a bell, baby, I would ring. Tell the whole world that you are my everything. If I were a bell, baby, you would know that you are my only love. And it's wonderful. If I were a bell, baby, I would ring from the hilltops, ring from each and every mountain side. Yes. Oh, if I were a bell, baby, I would ring I'm gonna sing about you one more time. If I were a bell, if I were a bell, baby, baby, I would ring. Tell the whole world that you are my everything. If I were a bell, if I were your bell, baby, you would know that you are my only love, and it's wonderful. If I were a bell, baby, I would ring each day for
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Teena. That was, oh, that's wonderful. And that's on your new album.
Yes, it is.
God, that's I feel like Rick James standing there. I just wish I could sing back
You
to
got
you.
prettier eyes than he does.
Eat your heart out, Rick.